Look at Saudi Arabia today, a country building futuristic cities in the desert, home to some of the world's largest energy reserves, enormous infrastructure projects, global investment, and one of the most ambitious economic transformation programs on Earth. Riyadh is expanding at extraordinary speed. The Red Sea coast is being transformed, and projects that would have seemed impossible only a few decades ago are now being built across the kingdom. But rewind the clock, not 70 years, just a little more than a century. There were no modern highways crossing the desert, no airports connecting the kingdom to the world, no enormous cities stretching toward the horizon, and there wasn't even a country called Saudi Arabia. Instead, the Arabian Peninsula was divided between different regions, communities, and rulers. Life depended on water, trade, livestock, pilgrimage, and the sea. And on the Red Sea coast stood a city that had been looking outward for centuries, Jeddah. For generations, pilgrims arrived here by sea before continuing toward Mecca. Merchants brought goods from Africa, India, and across the Red Sea. Jeddah was not the capital, but it was the kingdom's gateway to the outside world. So how did this desert kingdom transform itself so dramatically? Was it simply oil, or was something much bigger happening? Because Saudi Arabia's story is not simply the story of discovering wealth. It is the story of a country built, expanded, and repeatedly reinvented by successive generations of rulers. And you can see that transformation most clearly in its cities. Long before Saudi Arabia became a modern state, life across the peninsula followed a very different rhythm. In the interior, communities depended heavily on wells and oases. Bedouin groups moved across vast distances in search of water and grazing land. Along the coast, fishing and maritime trade connected Arabia to the wider world. And nowhere was that connection more important than Jeddah. For centuries, Jeddah had stood on the eastern shore of the Red Sea. It became a major port for Indian Ocean trade and, crucially, a gateway for Muslim pilgrims arriving by sea on their way to Mecca. The old city grew behind walls. Its narrow streets were filled with merchants, pilgrims, and sailors. Tall coral stone houses rose above the streets, their wooden roshans helping create shade and ventilation in the intense coastal heat. It was a remarkably international city. People from Africa, India, Arabia, and beyond passed through it. But Jeddah was only one part of a much larger and fragmented peninsula. There was no modern Saudi state yet. That would change in Riyadh. In January 1902, Abdulaziz Ibn Saud captured Riyadh. He was still a young ruler, but the event would become the beginning of a transformation that took more than 3 decades. From Riyadh, Abdulaziz gradually expanded his control. Najd al-Ahsa, Asir, Hail, the Hejaz. Region by region, the territory that would eventually become Saudi Arabia was brought under one rule. This wasn't an overnight transformation. It took approximately 32 years. And Abdulaziz was not simply building an army. He was building the foundations of a state. Government institutions began to take shape. Security forces were organized. Roads and services were developed. The administration of the pilgrimage became increasingly important. And Jeddah acquired a new role. It was no longer simply an old Red Sea trading city. It was becoming the principal gateway through which millions of pilgrims would enter the kingdom. Then, in 1932, the transformation reached its first great milestone. The scattered territories were formally unified as the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. For the first time, the modern Saudi state existed as a single country. But the kingdom was still poor, and Abdulaziz had one enormous problem. How could this new country support itself? The answer was buried beneath the desert. Oil exploration had already begun in the 1920s, but finding commercially viable quantities was another matter. Drilling continued through the 1930s. Then, in 1938, at Dammam Well No. 7, commercial quantities of oil were discovered. Saudi Arabia had something it had never possessed before. Abdulaziz died in 1953, and the kingdom entered its next phase. King Saud inherited a country that was already changing. Oil revenues were growing. Government institutions were expanding. Education and infrastructure were becoming increasingly important. And Saudi Arabia was beginning to connect its cities with a modern network of roads and services. But the scale of the transformation was still only beginning to become visible. Look at Jeddah during this period. The old walled city was still there, but outside those walls, a completely different city was beginning to emerge. And then, in 1947, the walls came down. For centuries, the walls had defined the limits of Jeddah. Now they were removed to make room for urban expansion. That single change became a powerful symbol. When Faisal became king in 1964, Saudi Arabia was entering a new era. Oil production was increasing, government revenues were growing, and modernization was accelerating. Roads spread across the country, schools and hospitals expanded, new airports connected distant cities, electricity and modern services reached more communities, and the cities began to change physically. A photograph from the 1950s and one from the 1970s can look like two different countries. The kingdom had entered the age of rapid urbanization. Under King Fahd, the kingdom continued expanding its infrastructure and its cities. And the country's role in the global energy economy gave it enormous international influence. Rapid development transformed historic neighborhoods across the kingdom. In Jeddah, much of the old urban fabric was lost during the explosive growth of the 1960s and 1970s. By the beginning of the 21st century, Saudi Arabia was no longer the country Abdulaziz had inherited. It had modern cities, universities, hospitals, highways, airports, and one of the world's most important energy industries. Under King Abdullah, the kingdom continued major investments in education, infrastructure, and economic development. Then, in 2015, King Salman became king, and the pace of transformation began accelerating again. Saudi Arabia was no longer simply asking how to develop using its oil wealth. It was beginning to ask a much harder question: what comes after oil? That question would define the next chapter. In 2016, Saudi Arabia launched Vision 2030. Its ambitions went far beyond building more roads or producing more oil. The goal was to diversify the economy, develop new industries, attract investment, expand tourism, and create new opportunities for a younger population. The Red Sea coast became the center of major tourism and development plans. Alula was transformed into a major cultural and tourism destination. New entertainment, technology, and investment projects appeared across the kingdom. And projects such as Neom became symbols of the country's attempt to imagine a completely different future. The official Vision 2030 program itself describes Saudi Arabia's strategic location as an opportunity to become a global hub connecting Asia, Europe, and Africa. And once again, Jeddah found itself at the center of the story. Its historic district is being preserved and redeveloped. Its Red Sea location is being incorporated into new economic and tourism projects. Saudi Arabia's transformation was never the work of one generation. Abdulaziz built the kingdom. Saud expanded its foundations. Faisal accelerated modernization. Khalid and Fahd presided over an era of extraordinary growth. Abdullah continued the process of development. And under King Salman, with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman leading the current Vision 2030 transformation, the kingdom is attempting something different once again. Not simply to build a richer Saudi Arabia, but to build a Saudi Arabia that can thrive beyond oil. Today, it is part of a country trying to become a gateway to the future. The desert that once seemed like a limitation became the foundation for a modern kingdom. And now, Saudi Arabia is trying to decide what comes next. The transformation isn't finished yet.